What if I told you there was a police officer who lied, and it landed someone in jail for almost a year? And get this, he was later promoted. Not just promoted, but promoted to a position where he reviews other officers' use of force reports. It sounds crazy, right? Well, it's happening in Cleveland. And it's ignited a whole new debate about police reform and the city's consent decree with the Department of Justice. So in this deep dive, we're going to be going deep into the story of Officer Stephen Fedorko and the push for new police promotion policies, and what this all means for the future of accountability in Cleveland.
We'll be unpacking a recent investigative report from Signal Cleveland. They are a local nonprofit news organization.
This isn't just about one officer or one incident. This case really highlights this bigger question. How do we balance second chances with accountability, especially in law enforcement?
It's a question with no easy answers. And it gets even more complicated when you factor in things like police union contracts, political pressures, and, let's be honest, the deep-seated mistrust that exists between law enforcement and many communities.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Who is Stephen Fedorko, and what exactly happened?
Back in 2017, Officer Fedorko accused a man, Joe Nathan Luton, of assaulting him and breaking his toe. Luton was arrested and spent almost 9 months behind bars based on Fedorko's word. The problem is Fedorko's story was a lie.
Wait, so he just made the whole thing up?
That's what it seems like. It later came out that Fedorko's toe was actually broken by another officer who accidentally dropped something on it.
Are you serious? And Luton spent 9 months in jail because of this.
It's a tragic case of justice gone wrong. And to make matters worse, the investigation showed that Fedorko didn't just lie about the assault. He also used excessive force on Luton during the arrest, like twisting his leg. And there were even witnesses who overheard Fedorko joking about the incident, saying he got in a bad fight with an a-hole he should have just shot.
Wow, okay, that's disturbing on so many levels. Even if the assault claim had been true, his behavior is just unacceptable. The excessive force, the disregard for someone's well-being.
I agree. It definitely raises serious questions about his character and judgment, don't you think?
Absolutely. So what happened to Fedorko after all of this came to light? He was fired, right?
You would think so, right? Especially since even the police chief at the time recommended he be fired. But instead, Fedorko received a 30-day suspension.
A 30-day suspension for lying about an assault, using excessive force, and then joking about it. That's it.
That's what the disciplinary process decided on. And believe it or not, a few years later, he was promoted.
Promoted? Seriously?
Yeah.
He's a sergeant now.
That's right. And a part of his new job is to review other officers' reports for excessive force.
I don't even know what to say to that. It's mind-boggling. This is where the whole debate about second chances versus accountability gets really complicated. Because, yeah, everyone makes mistakes and people can change, but how much is too much? At what point do past actions, especially ones that resulted in such a miscarriage of justice, disqualify you from holding a position of authority?
It really is the million-dollar question. And it's a question that Cleveland is dealing with right now as they try to reform their police department, especially under the watchful eye of the Department of Justice.
And that's where we'll pick up in part 2 of this deep dive. We'll explore Cleveland's consent decree with the DOJ and the proposed changes to police promotion policies, and whether those changes go far enough to address the systemic issues at hand.
This Fedorko case really shows the challenges that Cleveland is facing, trying to reform their police department under this consent decree.
Speaking of which, can we talk more about that?
Yeah.
What exactly is a consent decree? How does it work in practice?
It's more than just a letter, I can tell you that. Basically, a consent decree is an agreement, a legally binding one between the city and the Department of Justice.
So they're bound to it.
Exactly. Usually what happens is there's an investigation into the police department, and they find a pattern of issues like excessive force, racial profiling, or corruption. And that's what triggers the consent decree.
So in Cleveland, this investigation was because of all the civil rights violations.
Oh.
And all the use of force incidents, right?
That's right.
Okay, so it's kind of like a contract, outlining how things should be reformed.
Yeah.
What kind of things does the consent decree in Cleveland actually mandate? What does it say?
It's pretty broad. It covers things like use of force policies, de-escalation training, body camera usage, community policing strategies, accountability mechanisms for officer misconduct. They even have requirements for data collection and reporting. That way the city can track how well the reforms are working.
Data collection. So they're not just saying, do better, they're putting systems in place to measure it.
Right. And here's something interesting. A consent decree isn't a one-time thing. The DOJ doesn't just leave after the decree is signed. They keep an eye on the city's progress, usually with an independent monitoring team.
Hold on. Independent monitoring team. Who are these people? Are we talking like super sleuths who specialize in police reform?
Well, not exactly super sleuths, but they are experts in law enforcement, civil rights, and stuff like that.
Got
They're appointed by a federal judge. And their job is to be unbiased and fair, to make sure the city is actually doing what the consent decree says.
So they're like the referees,
Right.
making sure everyone's playing fair.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And they have a lot of authority, too. They can review documents, interview people, watch police in action, and they write public reports on how the city is doing with the consent decree.
And what happens if the city doesn't comply? Or if they drag their feet?
That's when it gets serious. The DOJ can actually take them to court.
Oh, wow.
In some cases, the court can even appoint someone to take over the police department, at least until the city gets its act together.
Wow, so these consent decrees have some teeth to them.
They do.
It's not just symbolic.
Nope. It's a serious legal process.
Which brings us back to police promotions in Cleveland. You said that the monitoring team wasn't happy with that, right? That officers with bad records were getting promoted.
Yeah, the Fedorko case really brought that to light. It showed a problem with how Cleveland promotes its officers.
How so?
Well, they're saying that just looking at an officer's recent record isn't enough.
Because someone like Fedorko could have a clean slate for a few years and then get promoted.
Exactly. And that's why the DOJ wants Cleveland to change its promotion policy. They want them to look at the whole picture.
Okay, so what would that look like? What kind of changes are we talking about? So instead of just a small snapshot, we're looking at their entire history. What would that look like?
One big change would be using an officer's entire disciplinary history, not just the past couple of years.
So something like what Fedorko did would still count.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. But how else can you get the full picture? What's there besides disciplinary records?
Well, the new policy also wants to look at an officer's community policing efforts.
Oh, good point. It shouldn't just be about avoiding bad things. It should also be about doing good in the community.
That's the idea. And they're also suggesting using body camera footage. That way they can see how an officer handles situations, especially when they need to de-escalate things.
So they'd be looking at how an officer calms things down instead of using force.
Exactly.
Interesting.
And it's not just about one incident here or there. This new policy is trying to look for patterns of behavior, even if nothing official happened, like a complaint or anything.
Wow, that's really going in depth. It sounds like they really are trying to create a system that prioritizes character and judgment, not just checking boxes.
Yes, and this is something that many police reform advocates have been asking for, but it's all in the details.
What do you mean?
Well, making a new policy like this happen isn't easy. It needs resources, training, and everyone in the department needs to be on board. It's also going to take some serious oversight to make sure the system is fair.
Yeah, I bet there are a lot of people who are skeptical, both in the police department and in the community. They'll want to see if these changes actually make a difference.
Absolutely. There's a lot of mistrust that needs to be fixed. That takes time. And it's going to take more than just policy changes. It takes open communication and a real desire to rebuild those relationships.
It's a long road.
It is.
So when will these new policies be put in place?
The goal is to have it all done by the first half of 2025.
Time is ticking.
That's right. And there's a lot at stake. The consent decree won't last forever. If Cleveland doesn't make enough progress, the DOJ could step in.
Okay, wow. No pressure, Cleveland. This has been really interesting. What would you say is the most important thing for our listeners to remember?
I think it's that real police reform isn't about reaching a finish line. It's an ongoing process. It takes constant effort, tough conversations, and challenging the way things are. And it's not just on policymakers or the police, it's on all of us.
Well said. We all have a part to play in making our communities better. And on that note, I think we've given everyone a lot to think about today. Until next time, keep asking those tough questions and stay engaged and keep on diving deep.